Welcome to a special Apocalypse Duds feature. This has been long in the making, almost as long as the show has existed. Today, we finally begin our discussion of the 2007 show Mad Men. Like years ago, we put out an all call to our followers asking, do any of you know a lot about Mad Men and want to discuss this with us? We heard from no one except Zach DeLuca at Newton Street Vintage was the only person to respond. An associate creative director at an advertising firm. He's passionate about vintage clothing, and he's live in our studio to fill in anything that we forgot.
Yeah, we never forgot, Zach, that you're literally the only person we asked that was like, oh yeah, like I would actually like to talk about that. Yeah, it's finally come to fruition. All these.
I had no idea.
We didn't have no followers at the time either.
Yeah.
I had no idea I was the only person.
I mean, we've talked to other friends like in the course of trying to like plan this shit out, and they're down with it. But yeah, literally, like, I mean, as Instagram stories go, we don't get a ton of reaction replies anyway. But yeah, dude, thank you for joining.
I'm always happy to talk about Mad Men.
Yeah, hell yeah. So are we, coincidentally. But yeah, to start things off, man, we'd like you to give us basically a 60-second pitch on what you love about the show and why you would consider yourself a quote-unquote authority on the show.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, it was really like, if you think all the way back to when it first came out, it was one of the, good long-form dramas on TV. My affinity for it is more nostalgic for the time in my life that it came out than like the specifics of the show. Although having given it a second watch relatively recently, it definitely still holds up. But yeah, I just remember being, in my mid to late 20s and wearing 60s suits every day. And all of a sudden the show came out and everybody looked like I looked. And it was like suddenly to be into that. And it was just one of those moments where like, I feel like when you're into vintage, it happens every so often where like sort of mainstream culture comes around and all of a sudden like random people that would never be into what you're into are suddenly like asking you questions about what you're into.
Right.
So that's why I liked it. And the acting was great. John Hamm, his career got made. He was like a math teacher or something, right? Like that's a great story. Christina Hendricks, the GOAT. Yeah. I don't know if that's a pitch, but that's
a comedy
connection to the world of Mad Men. Oh,
that's what John Hamm wanted to do comedy, and then like Mad Men happened, and it's like that is a funny show, but like he's not a funny part of the show. Well, he kind of is. He's like a wry, but he's not like, he's not making jokes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Connor and I were talking about this at length last week. Like Mad Men, I feel like is in a lineage of television that like, kind of, I guess it didn't start obviously, but like it took things from The Sopranos and it kind of like was one of the first cable shows of its ilk that eventually birthed like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and these other things that came after it. But like, there's definitely something about it that was unique for the time period of the show's run.
Yeah, it's like a crossover point between what was happening on HBO and mainstream cable. Right? Like it wasn't the first sort of long form drama, but it was certainly the first, if not one of the first long form drama on a mainstream, regular cable network.
Right. Yeah, it's no fucking.
There couldn't have been like whatever weirdo.
And what the hell was FX before Mad Men? Right, it was like that show Nip Tuck that I used to watch in college.
Yeah,
which was like wonderfully, delightfully trashy, but very not Mad Men in its writing.
Not on the same level.
Yeah,
not quite. Yeah, we were definitely in the Grey's Anatomy cable sphere at this point, which like, come on,
it was a lot more soapy.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess if you would take us back to 2007 for you, as you said, an exciting time in your life.
Yeah, so what was I doing in 2007? Let me go back. I was probably like from a clothing perspective, I was probably the deepest I have ever been before or since into like period specific fashion. It wasn't about like integrating vintage into a modern wardrobe. It wasn't about, sort of timeless vintage. Like I wore 60s shit every day. I wore emerald green. I had an emerald green shark skin shantung
Oh,
silk one button suit. I wore those little tab collars where you can barely see the point of the collar, where it's just like clutching the tie. I discovered Bobby from Boston. This, if you don't know Bobby from Boston, the greatest vintage store in the history of the universe.
legendary,
Discussed on this
legendary.
program. Yeah.
I had very recently discovered Bobby's, so I would go in there and buy suits and just get the real deal 60 suits. I was like collecting suits. I wore suits every day. I was the guy who wore suits to like the backyard barbecue. I would go see like an indie band in Boston, and I would like show up in a, blueberry blue 1960s suit. Like it wasn't Ivy. I didn't know the specifics of like Ivy yet. Like it
Right,
was
right.
just straightforward 1960s tailored clothing, whether
Yeah,
that's like Frank Sinatra-y looking
yeah. I was
suits
gonna
or
say this sounds
a little
like
more.
this is like half Ivy,
Yeah.
half Rat Pack.
Well,
Yeah,
can
and
I
I was
ask
going, I
you
was going to like
how you
soul
got to
shows
that
and
point?
stuff. Sorry.
How did you get there? Like, how did you arrive at the 1960s as a place
I
of
I don't
excitement?
I don't know. Honestly, it's one of those weird things. Like I don't know like why does something look good to you? Why do you enjoy something? Why does something look cool? I was never
Well, you described why
particularly.
just a second ago, right? Like it was that collar, it was that like cut of suit.
Yeah, but that's the what. That's not the why. Like why did I like that? I mean, I've always been into old music. So that's probably a sort of key like cultural locus in terms of how I dress or what I like, music taste probably has a lot to do. But I was working, so I graduated college in 2000. So 2007, I was working as like an office assistant. Did Men Men come out in 2007?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I was working as like an office assistant at a financial services company, and I had to wear suits every day at work, but I didn't want to look like a financial services professional. So I was wearing these like, in retrospect, they were like, knowing what I know now about dress codes, they were like pretty inappropriate for business suits. But I was wearing them anyway because, hey, I'm going to wear a suit. I'm going to wear this cool suit. So I was dressing a lot like that. Um,
Did they
as
give you
kind of a
shit about
fuck
that?
you. No, honestly, that was my first sort of inclination that like most people just see a suit.
Yeah.
They're not clued into the nuances. They see a suit and the suit has a color and that is it. Two buttons, strong shoulder, shark skin, ivy, double breasted, all that shit. Like most people do not see that. It's a suit, it's a blue suit, it's a gray suit. Like I, in retrospect now, it felt like I was being inappropriate, but I doubt anyone noticed. And certainly if they noticed, they never said a word to me. Nobody ever was like, you're dressing a little weird for our company like that. No, it never came. But anyway, I had a group of friends through work and some friends from college. And I remember like we would have like Mad Men watch parties. Like I remember when it came out, it was so hyped. And I was hyped for it because I was obviously into all this clothing. I didn't work in advertising. Didn't even have an aspiration to work in advertising. I knew nothing about advertising at the time. So it was really for me about like what excited me to watch the show in the first place was like the clothes.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what got me hooked.
That's yeah, it did. I mean, you're already dressing pretty similar to like a good part of that show. Like obviously it spans a decade. So, you know, things even as they progress with the show the change in fashion. But like how did that show start to influence the way that you dress?
I mean, I think it definitely like seeing the different characters and their sort of individual styles. Like, I feel like everybody would say they wanted to be a Don Draper, but I really wanted to look like Pete Campbell. For whatever reason, I liked
Nice.
his style a little bit more.
He had a
Um,
good style. Like it's
yeah,
also, for us clothing nerds, like Pete, you could transport Pete Campbell out of the show into Tumblr 2011, and like it wouldn't look that far off.
yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, I didn't love Sal's style. I thought the vests. We can talk about the waistcoats on Mad Men. That'll be like a whole
Ah,
chapter.
God, yeah, yeah.
I think the
so
show like
good.
did really weird shit with waistcoats that doesn't make
Yeah,
much sense.
I mean,
double-breasted
Like,
sometimes.
if you were to
dude,
put me on the phone with Janie, what's her face? I'd be like, what's the deal with the waistcoats?
I got, I
So
have to
that's not. So
say,
they not period appropriate?
They're not period appropriate. They're not worn in the correct way, and they're not even particularly the right waistcoats to be worn as odd waistcoats. You can't just
so
take any vest and make it into a waistcoat,
I agree with this.
like an odd waistcoat
Definitely
with a
agree with
with a
this hypothesis. I will say, from working,
weeds here. We're just diving into the weeds.
dude, so I worked
The
for,
show's about the week.
the show is about the weeds. So I worked for, this old school men's shop that started in this, for a few years.
Mhm.
Although this is not, these people have never once probably watched Mad Men, but a lot of them did come, there were plenty of customers from that generation that were either like young professionals or in school or whatever. These motherfuckers love a badly done waistcoat. And I don't know if that, how much that has to do with the show particularly and like the time period, but like there's a lot of old Southern white dudes that are in like creative positions that love that shit, and it always. I've told Connor this before. I have a hatred of that look, but like, you
Yes,
know,
I know
I guess
exactly what you're talking
maybe because I've been around that, like it doesn't seem that odd to me. But like, yeah, the
So I don't like a shirt sleeves waistcoat. I feel like if you're wearing it just by itself,
Yeah, I see what
obviously
you're saying. Yeah,
pants.
you look like a mixologist.
Yeah,
yeah,
I am.
yeah.
I do like the crazy looking waistcoat with the other tailoring though. I don't do it a lot. I think it's good if you're fat and your jacket can't button, then it's a winner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so Matt, I know exactly the look you're talking about. You're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
like dark jeans with like a gray, slightly tweedy Glen Plaid waistcoat that looks like it maybe came from a Glen Plaid suit, but also
yeah,
maybe not.
yeah.
And maybe it's got lapels and it probably has too many buttons and it buttons too high. And that's worn with like uh, a shiny tie and like generic shirt. And that's like
That
the
well,
dressed up dude.
there's definitely that side of it, and then like one of the dudes that I worked with literally wore either a 3-piece suit or a sport coat, odd waistcoat, and like the biggest trousers you've ever seen in your life. Like it works for
Okay.
him, but like he literally wore this every single day that I worked for this company, and I'm just like, first of all, how you've got 200 of these motherfuckers because you don't repeat things often, but like, yeah, there's just I don't know. Maybe that's part of the lasting impact of the show is that like a lot of idiots just don this trying to look like
Yeah, maybe
fucking I don't know. Yeah,
yeah, the
not
waistcoat is the residue of Mad Men.
yeah,
We gotta
yeah,
have
But
Cal.
anyway,
We
the
got
reason like
Cal back on
Pete,
the program
well, for
because
one thing, he didn't wear ridiculous vests. And his style was always like, again, it wasn't perfect, like,
it was
but
appropriate.
he
It was
was he
boring
was
and
for his
he had
character. He
money.
was a little bit like preppy and Ivy. He was the rich East Coast sort of mainline Philadelphia dude or Connecticut dude or wherever he was from.
Yeah.
Like he had that. He wore stripy ties, that kind of thing. And then I also love. I think the best clothing on the show for men is probably Roger Sterling.
oh, absolutely,
He was the most classic. He wore double-breasted suits even, into the 60s because he was supposedly older, so he was his sensibilities were a little bit out of touch maybe. But like I thought his suits fit him great. I thought they were like I feel like maybe what got me more into Ivy specifically was like digging a little bit into what Roger's suits were about.
yeah, yeah. He might be. I don't think he's my favorite like dress character, but for the character on the show, I think that his wardrobe across the entire series is probably the best.
Yeah, I would agree. I even liked it later in the series after he his post acid trip when he starts.
Yeah. Like
he's like wearing a double breasted blazer, but he's got like a silk handkerchief tied around his neck, and he's looking all Playboy.
Like, he looks like he could have stepped out of fucking Pitsy last summer.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, he just is like, when they talk about rich people and they talk about the condition of their skin, like it's golden. That's what he has going on. He's like bronze from like skiing all the time. Like, he just is magnetic. John Slattery is like great.
Yeah, I this could be a thing that has come up in an interview with him, but like he wore a lot of his clothes so well that like I personally can't tell it's a wardrobe half the time, which is nuts for like a TV show or production. Like, put that against like fucking Daniel Craig and a lot of the James Bond shit. Like
what's interesting about that too is I remember reading and seeing like eventually at some point, and I don't know if it's because they ran out of wardrobe or if it's because they wanted the characters to look a little bit more stylish in a contemporary sense, but they were like Brooks Brothers was making custom clothing for John Hamm and John Slattery for their characters. So sometimes the suits they were wearing were vintage, and other times the suits they were wearing were Brooks Brothers suits that were made that time to look a little bit vintage. And honestly, I thought the Brooks Brothers ones looked really cool. You could tell they were slightly different. Like the fabrics were a little more modern. They did like the edge stitching on the lapel to make it look like a Brooks Brothers-y type thing. But I remember loving those. And I remember when, this is maybe jumping ahead, but I remember when Brooks Brothers Black Fleece came out. Not to get into like the whole Thom Browne nexus, because I feel like that's very much a part of like the Mad Men moment.
Oh yeah, but that's coming.
When Black Fleece came out, it was basically like it was what John Slattery was wearing when he was wearing those Brooks Brothers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of that.
Wardrobe suits.
All of that was made by Southwick, which has been making Brooks Brothers clothing since the dawn of fucking times. R.I.P. Southwick, sadly. But like I remember looking at their setup and their samples at like an MR show in 2011 or 2012. I don't remember, and literally they had a model. I think it was the Cambridge that wasn't Black Fleece. But it looked like every fucking jacket on Mad Men at the time.
I remember that exact model. It was like it was like the final incarnation of like that era of tailored clothing for men.
Yeah. It was a 3-roll 2-button cuff, hook center vents, undarted, but also like high and tight, like a 60s jacket was.
Yeah. I remember trying on like a 42 long in one of those just to get like I don't wear a long, just to get like a normal jacket.
Yeah.
That was back. But let's back up because I feel like we're going to get to that whole thing.
Totally. We definitely are. So I guess, kind of to piggyback on the last little discussion, being into that clothing at the time, and the show coming out, and like you said, everybody was kind of like, wearing similar shit. Like, how broad of a scale did you see that kind of immediate effect?
I mean, so the other thing that was like really interesting at this time was I was really actually doing Newton Street Vintage as like a thing, whereas now it's just sort of my Instagram name. But I was selling on Etsy under that name, and I was selling at like local vintage markets under that name. And I noticed like an increased interest and demand in men's tailored clothing from that era, like pretty quickly.
Okay.
At first, it was, as often happened with that ridiculous Baz Luhrmann like Gatsby movie. It was for like costume needs. Like people were coming to vintage because there was this trend, whether it's a Gatsby party or a Mad Men party, that's what they were coming to me for. So it wasn't like an earnest, like, I want to start wearing 60 suits because 60 suits are cool. It was like, I need a suit to wear to this party. And that's kind of how it started. But that was a sort of the immediate uptick in because Mad Men parties were a trend.
Right.
And I loved having Mad Men parties because it was like everyone was dressed like me. If you didn't have a suit, I could go get you one from my closet. So like everybody would get dressed. I would just like style people. We'd take pictures. We'd pretend to smoke cigarettes or actually smoke cigarettes.
Lucky Strike. Lucky Strikes.
Yeah, I discovered Lucky Strikes around this time, of course, and like didn't realize what an unfiltered cigarette was. And
oh yeah,
was that but yeah, so that was sort of the immediate thing, and then there was sort of like it coincided, and I feel like it was a direct sort of effect of the show. So if you think about like where runway fashion was, 2006, 2007, right? This is like the height of like the Hedi Slimani skinny suit. Like suits are going down the runway. Suits are part of like fashion, but they still haven't become sort of mainstream. And I feel like the sort of the two people that helped make the suit like mainstream cool. Well, the two things. One being Thom Browne, and the other being Mad Men. And I feel like the combination of those two things and the fact that Thom Browne's cultural sort of references are the Mad Men era, especially when he first came out. Obviously, he's doing a lot more artistic stuff now, but when he first came out, like he did the rows of men in gray suits getting up from their desks, right? And everything was this like corporate automaton fashion. Like that was very much, that felt very Mad Men in a way.
Totally.
So I feel like those two things like increase the interest among regular guys into tailored clothing. And then a lot of times like 60s suits were just a shortcut to the Thom Browne look. You get a skinny lapelled charcoal gray 60s suit, you chop the pants short, you got yourself kind of a Thom Browne. Like,
right.
So that was a thing.
You could basically walk into any thrift store and buy a pair of gunboat shoes.
Yeah, and this was like the early beginnings of like hashtag menswear, right?
Right,
like,
totally.
This was like ACL was starting to be a big deal, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, this was early, like Style Forum started in 06 or 07, I think, right? Or maybe even earlier. So like this was the beginning of that too.
Yeah, totally. I hadn't discovered Style Form at that point, but I did maybe not right when Mad Men came out, but a year or so later, certainly in the 2008, 2009s, like I was on the trad forums. Ask
yeah.
Andy.
Ask Andy! Yeah.
Film Noir Buff, which was like a weird, somewhat, niche forum. But yeah, that's when I got into like forum culture and stuff too. Oh, there's another thing that reminds me, like I loved a line that came out right around that time called Band of Outsiders. Do you guys remember Band of Outsiders?
Yeah.
I love that shit. It was like LA it's kind of trite now, but in 2008 it was like so cool.
It was fucking cutting edge.
Like, yeah, it was like this weird intersection of like indie rock culture and LA and preppy clothing. So they were like button down shirts and stripy ties and skinny suits. Not quite Thom Browne, but very similar. I remember I would just go into Barney's on my lunch break and just like gaze, just like aspire to own Band of Outs. I've never owned a piece of the clothing. I'm sure it wouldn't fit me, but like I would. That was like, and I feel like that was part of that sort of era too. Sort of the Band of Outsiders look, and this like,
I guess in the like context of this conversation, Band of Outsiders I feel like is like part Hedi Slimane and part Thom Browne. Like it falls right in the fucking middle.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And there was always something like, not necessarily in the clothes themselves, although it's true. Like there was a very like mid-century modern sort of sensibility to the way the clothes were styled, the settings that they were photographed in, especially when Band of Outsiders first came out. It was decidedly retro, right? So like all of this is kind of happening at the same time. And like I wasn't like, this is how you sort of train your eye. You just sort of pick what you like from different places and see how they connect and see what relates to what. But like I understood visually that these things were related without necessarily fully grasping. Like I feel like for a lot of people, Mad Men probably also, if not single-handedly, like led to the mid-century modern craze
Yeah.
in terms of furnishings, in terms of like decor, in terms of how, the clock you had on your desk and everything else. Like there was this
Little
mid-century modern
effects.
craze
Yeah.
that happened around that time too, right? And
People were
like
buying pens.
you could, I forgot about Band of Outsiders, but you're talking about the forums reminded me, like my handle on one of the forums was Band of Outsiders. Like I loved that. Um, Probably more so than Thom Browne, if I'm being honest. Like
Right.
I love Thom Browne too. I
Their
remember
stuff
his
was cool. They
early.
had a cool like web presence
Well,
too, and
Yeah,
not a
they
lot
were
of
doing the
bands.
Polaroid thing and like
Yeah, and not
yeah.
many brands are really engaging in that
I mean,
way. Like there was this kind of small time where people of our age, I guess, were like influencing things.
right. I keep making analogies, but like Band of Outsiders also kind of was the quote unquote dressed up like American Apparel vibe because you had people that were
Yeah,
into that. Like,
yeah.
you hi puppy.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Uh,
can you hear the bark?
no, yeah, you're all good.
yeah.
We are a half animal friendly show. I am an animal person.
I'm not unfriendly. I'm not unfriendly. Here's what I'm saying. It's fine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but like you mentioned a couple of times like the indie rock vibe at that point too, which all of this somehow ties together in my brain. You know, like the people that were shopping at American Apparel, if they needed to go like,
Uh,
Oh, sorry.
where?
Am I muted? There we go.
Yeah. Now we're
we're good,
back.
we're good. Yeah, we can cut that.
Yeah, we'll figure that.
Yeah.
I'm writing the
Can we
time
pause
down
for
right
one?
now because
Can we
I'm a
pause for one
fucking
second? I gotta
genius.
pull something out of the oven.
Yeah, yeah,
Can
yeah.
you pause for 1 second?
Yeah, so like a couple of times already, you've mentioned like going to indie shows and stuff wearing a suit, but like the indie sleaze shit that was going on at that time period, to me, like there's a connection between like they would buy American Apparel to like wear out to the bar, but they're like, oh fuck, I gotta go see I gotta go to a wedding this weekend. Oh, Band of Outsiders, I'll get a Band of Outsiders suit and shirt.
Yeah, totally. That's yeah. And the other thing, speaking of indie sleaze, and I think probably someone who got me into suits before I was sort of into 60 suits specifically, Albert Hammond Jr.,
Yeah,
the
Right.
yeah,
guitarist for the Strokes. In college, the Strokes were the coolest band. I loved the Strokes. I saw them live back when they were touring on, I think, their second album. And in New York, it was probably passe to like them at that point, but in Boston, it was still. And Albert Hammond Jr., he was doing the old suits with a T-shirt, and his suits were always a little shrunken. His pants are always a little short. He'd wear them with sneakers, and I feel like I started wearing suits like that. It just is a straight ripoff of Albert Hammond. I should probably mention at this time I also had a very similar hairstyle to Albert Hammond Jr. I wasn't bald; I had a gigantic afro, just like full curly. So I was rocking that with my Albert Hammond suits. I would go to a thrift store, just like a literal thrift store, and I had no understanding of the finer points of a suit. I just knew a suit was a suit, and I knew if it fit me or it didn't. And if it didn't, if it was a little small, that was good.
right.
And I would just get those for $8 or whatever at the time, and just wear them over T-shirts. And that was probably what led me into suits in general. And then from there, wearing them a little bit more like earnestly, or with a little bit more like intention, a little bit more understanding, led me to like 60s suits specifically, and what made this suit different from that suit, and like what made a 60s suit different from a 70s suit, right?
Right,
And like
right.
how could you spot the differences in styles, and then from there, like, well, what makes this suit an Ivy suit versus this suit a continental suit, which is what the term for like the more European stuff would have been at the time. Like those kind of distinctions all came through like research and that kind of deeper dive. But like in terms of like waking up one morning and being like, hey, it might be cool to go to this show wearing a suit, it was like 100% like Albert Hammond Jr., Jack White,
Right,
like
right.
those kind of um, you know celebrities or whatever at the time.
Yeah, the like indie sleaze post Hives wannabe bands.
Yeah.
Although
Totally.
this has nothing to do with Mad Men, but I listened to the newest Hives record the other day. It's pretty fucking good, even 20 years on. So gotta give those guys their props.
I keep seeing that guy on like Instagram. He keeps popping up in my stories. Like,
Oh, that's funny.
around.
They are.
And
they still look the same. The record has like the right amount of cheese that I'm like pretty into. So they're
this is not a euphemism, everyone. This is not a euphemism. Matt means cheesy.
Yeah.
The right amount of cheesiness.
Yeah, I can get down with it. I'm sure they also got a lot of people into suits back in like 2001. So
I remember their white suits. Yeah.
The white suits. Totally. Not everyone can pull that off.
I feel like the bigger point of this is like before Mad Men came along, the suit was already starting to find its way into like popular culture and
totally.
fashion and
like
that kind of stuff.
Mad Men was just like a trampoline effect for the
an accelerant. It wasn't. It wasn't. It didn't spark. It wasn't the spark. It was the gasoline.
Absolutely. Which is kind of the whole point of this little feature that we're doing. So just figuring out how it affected all of us nerds.
Right. Which yes.
So Zach, we talked about how Pete and Roger are probably the two best dress characters. Do you have a favorite overall character?
Not talking about clothes or style, just talking about
just in general.
Person.
Yeah.
Peggy, hands down, Peggy.
Nice. Okay. All right.
Peggy Olsen. Yeah. No contest. I mean, I
was the show's true main character, right?
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth Moss did such a great job with that role. The character was so well written, inflicted. Her character arc was so interesting. You rooted for her at the same time she did despicable things. Like, it was just this, like, just the absolute prototype for a great character.
Yeah.
They were all pretty deep.
Every single fucking character on that show, for the most part, did like terrible things, which I kind of think is a big part of the show. It's just like, oh, these people are awful human beings. We're going to show you how their lives all interconnect.
Well, not exactly. It's like everyone does awful shit. It just depends on your perspective.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I don't think that's a particularly like whatever.
Yeah, it's I don't
think it's particularly effective, but
right.
So yeah, who's your guys' favorite character?
I gotta say Sal for me. Like I don't know why. I just find his character so fucking intriguing and hilarious. In like I don't know. I guess maybe because he's got that like, or I guess supposed to have that New York mentality where he's like very quick witted and just like what's the word?
But he's from Baltimore.
Yeah, he is from Baltimore. So Southern by association. But like he just has
quick wit.
He has that type of humor that I really like in his character, where it's like a lot of times it's backhanded shit, and I'm just like, oh,
he's dry. I mean, he's really like wick and dry witted, like just a well written character.
Very well written.
Before we decided to do this independently, like I always liked Sal. I thought it's a great story, and one that was not extremely popular at the time. Like the idea of like sexuality, being in the closet, all of that stuff was not really explored in mainstream television. So it was kind of compelling. And the waistcoats. I mean, I think he's like, I think his outfits are fucking great.
From a style standpoint, Sal is definitely way more on the Connor spectrum than the Matt Smith spectrum.
Yeah, dude, he just is out there doing weird stuff.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Which I would also look like an asshole if I tried to wear some of the shit that Connor does, and looks very good. Props to the Sals and the Connors of the world.
And they're out there, but there are not a lot of us.
Yeah, there's some. So also since you said you were dealing vintage clothing at the time, which I think I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this, but I'm pretty sure that I used to follow your Etsy like back in the day.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and like dude, I think I've been following you on Instagram since like long before you and I actually talked about anything. Like, but I'm like Newton Street Vintage. I'm almost positive that like you were one of my favorite Etsy sellers in like 2010 to 2012, somewhere in there. At some point.
Yeah, that was a wild time to be on Etsy.
Yeah, it really. Oh, dude, it was
like where there was stuff that was actually good on the site,
and where Etsy's search engine worked. God, this is so This is an entire episode conversation.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Not going down that tangent. Sorry, y'all. So, as someone that like is pretty immersed in the clothing that this show is portraying, what did not cut the mustard for you?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. A few things. So I think a lot of times costume designers, I think the show got a lot of credit, some of it undue, for like what was perceived as meticulously recreating it. And I think like that's to a large extent true, but there were some things that just weren't quite sort of right. A big one for me, the shirts. It was abundantly clear, with the exception of like a few instances, like everyone was wearing just like a modern white dress shirt, like for whatever reason, like semi-spread collar, really high collar, like pretty stiff collar. And shirts back then, even, and I'm not just talking about like rolling ivy button downs, like even just like a basic white men's dress shirt from like 1959, 61, whatever, would have a pretty soft, relatively short collar, because ties were, and so there was, it wasn't just like the period inappropriateness of the collar itself. It was also these guys wearing these like 2-inch wide ties with these collars that were meant for 3.5-inch wide ties. Like it looked really incongruous. Like if you know about ties and shirts, like it's not a difficult thing to spot on the show at all.
No.
Yeah, that's not to say that like sometimes characters weren't dressed in like period appropriate shirts. Like there were a lot of those tab collars that I was talking about in the beginning, which is just a really weird shirt style in general, but especially the incarnation of the tab collar from like this period, where, do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's got a little it's a button down collar.
So it's like
that's in the middle.
It's like a super short point collar, right? But it's got the tab, right? So it's just like a tab collar, but the collar points are so short and the tab is so tight that like everything just looks like almost like a clerical collar. Like everything's just pulled across your neck.
Yeah.
And it like clutches the tie. It's like tie bondage. It's just like clutching the tie in this. It's really like it's a very strange shirt collar, but it's also extremely of that period.
Totally.
And I used to love those. I used to wear those for that reason, because you know.
Yeah, and you really have to have like a 2-inch tie to wear those, because
you can't snap it if you don't. Yeah, you need a really skinny tie with a tiny knot. Otherwise, you actually can't snap the tab.
Right. Yeah. Good luck doing a double forehand in that.
Right. So like that, I think the waistcoat. I think the waistcoats was a big one. Like I think like that. Like my issue wasn't that people were wearing waistcoats, or that I don't like jaunty waistcoats. I think there are a few things that came into play. Like a 3-piece suit is one thing, right? There were very few instances of like men in the 1950s wearing waistcoats with suits that didn't match the suits. And if they did, or if there was, and I found like ads from the period, or like, magazine articles that reference this, there were like sort of specific waistcoats that you would wear that way, and they were worn really with like specific suits.
Right.
So if you were wearing like a country tweed suit, you might wear a Tattersall vest, or you might wear like a mustardy sort of paisley vest. But it was a very like country sort of hunty, like.
It's very genteel. It's very like hand in the pocket of the jacket.
Well, and like
you would not wear like a. Go ahead.
Like, I know there are different rules for business dress between, say, the UK and the US. Always have been. Like, it's kind of a no Brown in town situation, I think. Because, yeah, like, these guys might have worn that when they went to ride horses, on Montauk or wherever the fuck their country home was.
Right.
But, like...
Which, like, isn't that, like, a racist euphemism, too?
What? No Brown in town,
Right.
no brown shoes in town. You wear black shoes.
No
Or suits. Yeah.
But, like, there are things that are double meanings, and I think that's
I am
lucky.
referring to the shoe thing.
No shit, I know, but I'm saying.
But like you were kind of saying, Zach, I think, or alluding to, like, you wouldn't wear this type, like a tattersall vest, in a business setting at the time.
I mean, I wasn't alive then, but
it doesn't seem
from
like
what I've gathered, from what I've read, like that wouldn't be. I'm sure someone did. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure in the history of the waistcoat, but like
I'm
it
sure.
wasn't supposed to be worn that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and
I think like
they birthed an entire generation of Brooklyn bartenders that never paid.
Right. But my issue with the waistcoats was almost separate from that, which is that the waistcoat that they were wearing weren't the sort of, they were wearing them with the sort of suits that you wouldn't wear an odd waistcoat with.
Right.
And then the odd waistcoats themselves were not the patterns and fabrics that you would ever want in an odd waistcoat.
Yeah.
It looked like they had taken vests from other three-piece suits and just sort of slapped them on characters.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's like especially guys that were dressing. So if you go back and look at like articles in menswear magazines from this era, like, and you can find some cool illustrations and photos and stuff, like there was this sort of interesting play between what was then called natural shoulder tailoring or Ivy League tailoring, which was kind of like, if we're going to assign it to a character on Mad Men, probably mostly like Roger Sterling and sometimes Pete.
Right.
And then there was like this sort of continental style, which was, a little bit more like how Don Draper dressed, a little bit more like 2-button shark skin, really narrow side vents. And the distinctions between these honestly weren't that big compared to like the wild distinctions between suits nowadays, where you've got like the structured shoulder and all this other, like it was all very like similar in silhouette. It was all pretty trim. It was all pretty natural, but there were these like subtle differences. And then the big difference too was like colors. Like continental suits, you get like the blueberry blues and the copper sort of shark skin and the root beer browns, and everything was a little bit sheenier. And then, like, obviously the Ivy League tailoring was very flannel, olive, navy, classic pinstripes, that kind of, Glen Plaids, all the stuff that we still like and wear. And I felt like the mix of, from what I understand, or at least have read, like those were sort of two separate shops.
Right.
Like you wouldn't just go to one store and get both of those types of tailoring. You would go to like a store that specialized in more like Italian continental stuff, and you'd go to a classic Ivy League shop, which would have been, obviously J. Press or Brooks Brothers, but also like Paul Stewart in the 1960s was one of those types of shops.
Yeah.
Or your regional, clothier or whatever. But like, and I don't know how rigid in reality, historical reality, those two like camps would have been. Like honestly, like guys probably bought both of them just like they do now.
Yeah,
like,
certainly. Especially if you're working in Midtown Manhattan, all of this is immediately surrounding you. So,
but it seemed like a character like Pete especially would understand the distinction between those things, and I felt like that wasn't really like authentically represented in his character. Like someone like Don might not, right? Don's a social climber. He doesn't have that like
pedigree.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Someone like Roger certainly would, even if he decided to like kick it to the curb after trying drugs or whatever. But yeah, I feel like that sort of distinction was, and I didn't realize that at the time, right? When I was into it, it all looked great because I hadn't weeded through all those different, details and distinctions yet. So like it all just looked amazing when I first saw it, right? And then I got a little deeper into it, did a bunch of digging. And, like, I should probably mention, like, at this time I was so into clothing that this was just like a natural hobby that was happening. It wasn't like I was like, I must research Mad Men post haste. Like it was just like happening in the background while the show was on. So that was kind of like that was kind of that, and that's probably my two things. The waistcoats, like some of the suits were a little not right for the characters, and the shirts were probably the biggest one. The shirts were bad.
Yeah,
We gotta pull some
I can agree.
strings.
Yeah, I can agree with that one. You know, it's also like, to me, knowing Brooks Brothers, it's really hard to think that like you couldn't get it closer to correct, because they literally haven't changed all that much at all. So like,
Yeah, I think it was just they didn't know or didn't care. They were just like, men wore white shirts, get a bunch of white shirts.
right,
Like,
yeah,
like
yeah.
that, like yeah, like that level of
Yeah,
intensiveness.
they didn't have a.
It just seems like such a glaring like point of importance, you know?
Wasn't there an episode though? Like thinking now about it, like wasn't it a big deal? Like there was an episode with Don Draper and G. Didn't that happen in one of the latest seasons where like he goes to California and he's like in a white T-shirt and jeans, like working on a car?
That sounds right. Like the first part of this
honestly,
last
like,
season.
I was just thinking this as we were talking earlier. Like, I don't think that Don's casual looks get enough credit, because there's some of my favorite about the entire fucking show. And like, by casual, you know, sometimes it's a pair of flannel trousers, a pair of boots, and like a sweater, like when he's, you know, mowing the grass or something. But like, yeah, there's some really fucking good, like, casual vibe, you know, very 60s looks that he pulls off.
Yeah, I thought so too. He wore polos in a really nice way. There were those great episodes where he had to go into the office on the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he'd always show up in like a sport coat with a polo underneath and look really cool.
Right. I've tried.
One of those episodes, I think I remember Pete showing up in like a Madras jacket, which felt right.
Yeah. 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 I feel like when they expanded to California, there were some really solid like West Coast looks, but like it was West Coast done by East Coast people, which I really appreciated.
Yeah. I'm trying to drop a photo in the, but it's not dropping. I found a great pic of for those listening. I found a great pic of Don Draper in a double denim Levi's jacket and jeans. But then I zoomed in and I realized the jacket is like period incorrect by about 30 years.
Oh, is it a Type 4 or whatever the fuck, a trucker?
We found another wardrobe issue for me to harp on.
Wow, dude, wardrobe malfunction.
So it's the 80s version with the lower two pockets on the Type 3.
It is an 80s version with lower two pockets. Yeah. I can just see the buffalo plaid.
You guys are like brother from another mother.
It's literally 30 years too late to be worn by Don Draper.
Oh my god. Yo, we gotta we're gonna share that when this comes out, and I have to figure out what episode.
And I can't overstate this enough. Because this is what it means to be a clothing nerd, but like John Hamm looks fucking great in this wardrobe.
Absolutely.
He's amazing.
He scarcely looks bad.
It's just not right.
Right.
If you know what you're looking at.
If you know, you motherfucking know.
He looks cool as hell. It fits him great. It's a great looking thing, but it's just not the thing that historically.
This is why someone needs to hire me for all of their period correct menswear shit. And I will not make this.
Well, that's why I was talking about. I follow him on Instagram, and he's super into the 60s too. Christopher Pizarro. Do you guys follow him?
I do not.
Shout out, Chris. We've DM'd. We've never met in person. But he has great, like, authentic 60s style. And I think he works in like costuming now for shows. I think he worked on Maisel.
Oh, that's awesome.
Marvelous Miss Maisel.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why it rings a bell.
Yeah,
maybe things will improve.
My friend Sam, who had on the show, Sam Rockwell, also is like, I think I said it on that episode, but like the most knowledgeable person about vintage that I know. And yeah, she's done some some very period correct shit, and I'm like, yeah, cool. There are people that are actually like giving a fuck about the stuff, not just
And that actually reminds me, we're talking about my Etsy. We're talking about what kind of clothes we're selling, what was happening. The only time I've ever like been tangentially connected to like any kind of costume production was after Mad Men got popular. I'm not sure I think it was still on the air. I think it was like one of the really mainstream now ABC tried to put out a show that was just called Vegas, and it was like the Vegas Strip.
Yeah.
I think it bombed after a season, but they bought like a massive box on Etsy for the show. They didn't like
Wow.
correspond with me. There was no like, they just add to cart purchase. I shipped it, but I knew it was for them because it had their like studio number and it said like attention Vegas wardrobe department on that dress. Like it was probably the biggest order I'd ever gotten. They cleaned me out. Like I never bothered to watch the show to see if anything got used on screen. It was probably just for extras if it on. Like that was pretty cool. Yeah, I definitely felt like a big shot for about 5 minutes.
Dude, yeah, it's always nice.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, this is a fun trip down memory lane.
Yeah, dude.
Band of Outsiders. I haven't thought about Band of Outsiders in like years.
Hey, years. We want to put brainworms into your head that now you're going to think about shit that you haven't thought about.
I want to look at old Band of Outsiders ads. I used to like. But this is before. I don't even know if I had a smartphone. This shit was on. Like, but I used to like doom scroll on my computer just the Band of Outsiders like website because it was all just like Polaroids of people in these clothing.
Wasn't the photographer who did that campaign?
You got me.
It's not Terry Richardson, but I feel like it's someone in that realm.
Yeah, it was that kind of a vibe. It was very LA.
I can't remember who the photographer is. You mentioned earlier that like, you know, when this show came out, you weren't even, you know, thinking about going into advertising, but did this somehow play a role in you like going in that direction? Just out of curiosity.
Not even a little bit.
Okay.
No. Not even a tiny
too
bit.
Fucking perfect.
So just unrelated ideas, unrelated things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, you're a very you have an eye for detail and things, which, you know, lend itself well to, I'm sure, what you do and things like that. It was just it would have been too perfect.
I mean, I should give it a rewatch because some of the storylines might resonate even more now. I mean, obviously the deep personal stuff and the interpersonal storylines are what they are, but like a lot of like the client drama and the deadline drama, like that might be a little more close to home now than it was back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting thought. But no, it didn't have any real like. I think part of the reason my favorite character in retrospect is Peggy is because my career trajectory was very Peggy-esque. But I don't think the show itself was like, hey, you should go figure this stuff out. You should go get into the ad world or become a copywriter or whatever.
Right. Okay.
It wasn't that linear. They were very disconnected in time and space and thought.
Right.
So then, do you think we're 10 years basically from the premiere, the end?
Not from the end of
the show?
Oh, yeah. That's like a milestone. That's like an anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you think of it 10 years on? Is this too broad?
To quote Don Draper, to paraphrase Don Draper, I don't think about it at all.
Right. Yeah.
No, I mean, I do, but I don't. I mean, I didn't have any real like inkling. It was on Netflix. I think I watched a bit of it. I don't think we definitely gave it a full rewatch not too long ago. My wife and I, but I haven't thought about it in a so when you guys popped up with that story about like anyone have thoughts about Mad Men, that really like brought it back. But I wasn't like, I wouldn't even, if I'm being honest, I wouldn't even say it's one of my favorite shows. It's definitely like a nostalgic time and place for me. So it takes me back in that sense, but like, I wouldn't consider it like a favorite TV show, even though I religiously watched every episode and like went over to people's houses to have parties about it and like meticulously followed the releases of the Mad Men Banana Republic collection and the Mad Men Brooks Brothers collection.
Oh my gosh.
All that
yeah.
shit.
We did not even get into the weeds with the Banana Republic and how god awful.
It was so interesting though, because it was like, in some ways, like guys going and seeing that stuff, like a certain percentage of those guys will like get sort of, you know, driven in the right direction, or like they'll find their way.
Totally.
They'll find their way to like the real shit. But yeah, I agree. The Banana Republic thing. I feel like a lot of the sort of retrospect of like the Mad Men parties and like didn't they do like a Times Square thing where everyone was like smoking and fake cigarettes from cigarette holders and had like fedoras on and shit?
Sounds
do you remember
correct.
that? They definitely did like a thing in Times Square that was like a watch party for one of the. I think it must have been because it was a huge phenomenon at that point, so it couldn't have been season one. But I think it was the second season they did like a crazy thing in Times Square. I feel like that a funny little. If I had to boil down all of this stuff, all these impressions, all of this, all these sort of style moves, all the it would all get boiled. If I had to pick like one or two words, it would be tie bar. Like the resurgence, the absurd, and
oh my gosh.
Like nobody could have foreseen. If I could have a time machine, I would go back in time and like start a tie bar brand in 2008.
Well, you would be amongst
stock up on tie bars. I would be the tie bar.
I was gonna say you would be amongst a lot of other motherfuckers that had that same idea, although a year or two later. Because
yes,
I
feel like Mad Men, for whatever reason, it led to this obsession with men's accessories.
Yeah.
Tie bars, cufflinks. These things somehow came to be like the Don Draper thing, right? Like, I don't know what it was about the tie bar. Maybe it was just like the obscurity of it, or like everyone kind of knew what a tie was, but here's this weird thing you use to clip your tie to your shirt.
Right.
Like, I remember going to vintage stores and looking for those, and they were selling out.
Yep.
Like they could not keep them in stock. Most vintage stores, even the bad ones, will have like a section of just like really cheap men's cufflinks and tie accessories that never get sold. That's sort of just collecting dust in some display case.
They sell one every 3 years.
That happened. Yeah. And those cases were like getting mobbed and they were getting cleaned out. Everybody wanted every cufflink, every tie bar, every weird little collar pin, which I still like. It was this insane gold rush for like bad. What was it called? What's that company? Like Swank? Was it? There was a company called Swank that made like just cheap, run of the mill men's cufflinks and tie bars and stuff back in the day, and like that stuff was just flying out of the doors. Just absolutely. I remember every store that I would go to, they were like, we don't have any tie bars. Like 11th person this afternoon. People go to the vintage store having no interest in vintage clothing, but they'd be like, oh my God, tie bars. And they'd buy a tie bar.
Right.
Insane.
Yeah. I mean, when I started at Epaulet, like my first Christmas there, the, Christmas season of 2011, every fucking like partner of some boring ass dude in Carroll Garden bought a fucking tie bar for their stocking or whatever. Like, and this was 2011. Like, this was 3 seasons into the show.
Yeah, it was like, I feel like the tie bar craze is like the microcosm of the cultural impact of Mad Men.
Totally.
For sure.
Totally. And before we started doing or working on this, I hadn't thought about a tie bar in God knows how long.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Man, thinking about tie bars, thinking about Band of Outsiders.
Well, Zach, dude, thank you for letting us take a walk down memory lane with this. And everyone else, stay tuned for more in our Mad Men feature.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun, guys.
Yeah, thanks for the times. I appreciate it.
Good evening and welcome to part 2 of part 1 of our Special Apocalypse Duds Mad Men series. Long in the making, this was Matt's idea. We've been working on it for about a year. This episode will serve as part 2 of the first episode of the series. We hope you enjoy. Our next guest came highly recommended by the sage of menswear himself, Derek Guy. Today, we welcome the elegant electrician, the sniper of Style Forum, the best-dressed member of the IBEW, Peter Zottolo. Welcome and thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Wow, such kind words. I don't know how well I can live up to that, but I will try.
You do. People have seen the fucking outfits. You do.
Right. And no offense to anyone. I have lots of union friends, but most union people that I can think of don't really, don't really command the attention with their clothes. You kind of
It's
Yeah,
all
dude.
camera trickery and smoke and mirrors.
Well, so that's even more impressive, right? Because you do the photography kind of
I
yourself.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So it's even more fucking impressive. So like, yeah, good on you.
Yeah, anyone that's been around, the forum and the hashtag menswear world of the past, number of years has certainly seen. We haven't officially had you on the show, but could you give us a little background about yourself and tell us why you have insight into Mad Men?
Oh, I'm honored to be on the show. So first of all, thank you for asking me to put in my 2 cents. It's really going to be 2 cents, maybe a cent and a half. So I'll do the best I can. Mad Men. I remember when that came out. That was in the mid 2000s, right? And It was so well done. It was so well done. Probably the first good thing that AMC did. Really, was this before Breaking Bad? I want to say it was before Breaking Bad.
I think it started before.
Yeah, I think so as well. It was one of the first AMC kind of legacy televisions that they ended up making, like the first in a lineage.
Yeah,
Breaking Bad was the next year because
it was the next year. Okay,
2007, Breaking Bad 2008.
Wow. Okay, man, it's so crazy to go back in the Wayback Machine and look at how much it did influence me. So I'm scrolling through my Tumblr. If you want, I don't recommend
really go
it,
way
but
back.
it does give you a little bit of insight. So, okay, I'm going 12 years ago. I keep scrolling. I do keep scrolling. So to go back even earlier to the 90s, I was in high school, and most high school kids like myself could not really afford suiting. But I grew up wearing suiting in a religious household, and so my parents couldn't really afford to clothe 3 boys in suits. So they said, well, if you want to find something in a thrift store, go for it. So I would go into thrift stores and find really cool plaids, really cool Brooks Brothers suits. And I was just looking at a picture of myself from 1994, which is the year that I graduated high school. And there's a picture of me in a plaid, really chunky plaid. I'll send it to you.
Yes, please.
It's actually a really good picture of me. Most of the pictures when I was a kid, I'm like, I'd rather
compared to the other ones. Horrible pictures of you.
I'd rather just relegate that to my memory and not share that with anyone else. But this one is a good one because the jacket is just so good. So the biggest thing that was around in that time was J. Crew. In fact, side point, if you want some really inspiring 90s pictures, there's an Instagram called Lost J. Crew, which is amazing.
Oh!
Check that Instagram out. It is just gorgeousness and a trip down memory lane. But I was really into that because for me, as a Southern California boy, that was so very foreign. The Northeast was something completely different, a world apart. But I liked it because it kind of referenced those classic Ivy styles, which were all but forgotten in Southern California. You would see them in some corners, but not very often. And so this picture is of me in a J. Crew tie and a J. Crew chambray shirt. And it's a plaid tweed 60s sack cut sport coat, 3-button narrow lapels with swelled seams, patch flapped pockets, 2 buttons on the sleeves.
Of course.
And
the best.
It was just a great jacket, and I wish I still had it.
Do you remember,
do you
remember what maker it was?
I don't. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I wish I did know. But side point, if you do want someone who is extremely knowledgeable about Ivy style and Mad Men in particular, reach out to a guy named Christopher Pizarro. He is from the Bay Area, but he has been living in New York for the past few years. And he used to work in a vintage store on the Haight, and I would see him there from time to time. Then he moved to New York, and now he works in the industry. One of his projects was helping to outfit the fabulous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh, shit. That's awesome.
Yeah, so he is extremely knowledgeable. And I think he said, I posted that picture of me when I was graduating high school. And he says, I think I had the same jacket. So maybe he knows the maker of that jacket. But anyway, I was really into that at that time. And then when I moved to New York in 95, from 97, again, I would find these used 60s suits. I have a few pictures of me in those. They were entirely too big, of course. And so I
Right.
tailored them. So you have these, oversized shoulders and nipped waist and pants where you take in the waist so much that the pockets meet in the back. And the alterations lady is just rolling her eyes when you ask her to do it. But she says, yeah, sure, whatever, kid.
You're right. Money is
And
money.
then I came home back to California, but moved up to the north part of California in the Bay Area and was still kind of into that. But by the time the early 2000s and the mid 2000s happened, I was just getting into style form and I was just learning about more classic men's tailoring before the 60s. So Italian and British tailoring that would reference the classic 30s, classic 40s. So I started to swing that way a little bit. And then Mad Men came out, and that rekindled my love for the 60s tailoring. So I got really into that. By that time, I had not the best job in the world, but I had one that gave me a little bit more spending money. And so I would go into vintage stores or just scour thrift stores for very particular suits that would mimic the style of Mad Men. And I have these suits that I look at them now and I look at me in them and I'm like, man, I miss that suit. I really, really, really dug that suit. And I've gotten bigger since then. So, and this is not to say that the style doesn't look good on bigger guys. It's just
Totally.
I kind of thought, well, I should get something a little more in line with my changing taste. So I did eventually grow out of that. But man, during that time, I had some killer suits. That was just such a great time.
Yeah, especially at that time period too. And I kind of still think this way. Like 60s stuff, most, early stuff is a little bit more classic, a little bit wider lapel. The kind of mid 60s was very much like, the more narrow stuff. And in the late 60s, you started getting into almost the 70s size lapels.
Yeah.
So like, there's three distinct differences in that decade alone, but I think that like a lot of them, especially because they're soft shouldered, not quite unstructured like Italian stuff, but like, if you're a certain person and you're into that, like you can kind of work that into just a normal wardrobe and it doesn't look off. Brooks Brothers hasn't really changed since the dawn of time. So, their classic sack cuts can still look really good.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, around the same time, Thom Browne was working with Brooks Brothers for, was it Black Fleece?
Black Fleece.
I want to say.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I can't remember when that collab started, but I want to say it was like pre Mad Men, like 06-ish.
Man, let me just do a quick search. Thom
fact check me.
Browne, Brooks.
Because
No,
we
I'm
talked.
curious.
This came up with Zach. Like it was all at the same time, basically the same time, anyway.
Yeah. Oh well, I'd have to do a little bit more research that I'm willing to do right now. But yeah, it was around that time. And so I remember distinctly going into a Black Fleece store. So there was a Black Fleece store in San Francisco off of Fillmore, and going in there and thinking, man, this is so great. But even then I thought, man, boy, these jackets are short.
Right.
But I think the resurgence of that style made everyone forget that they were actually well-fitting suits. They were not overly slim. They were not overly short.
Yeah.
But when the style came back again, as people are prone to do, they went to extremes and they had very cropped cropped pants and cropped jackets and things that were a little too short. In fact, I remember my wife, she's actually behind me right now, and she can confirm this. There was one suit that I got and she's like, no, too tight.
It was.
They didn't wear it like that.
Yeah.
And
Right. Yeah.
because that's one of her favorite time periods for women's clothes as well.
Oh, totally.
So both of us would have fun. Oh, check out this cool suit. Oh, check out this cool dress. And this one brown shark skin suit, she's like, little too short, little too tight. And I'm like, you're right. So I gave that away.
It's all relative, I guess. Like you sort of go toward the edges as you become more comfortable with stuff.
Yeah, you can play around with that and until you finally settle on what for you is the right amount of room, the right amount of length.
For sure.
I mean, that's a whole lifetime, basically. You try things out and you're like, actually, this is not quite me. It's a little too big or it's a little too roomy or it's a little too tight. And
Right. Yeah.
that's part
Yeah.
of the fun, right? You try it on and you give it a couple months and you like, actually, no.
I personally had a couple of Black Fleece things that I had thrifted.
Oh, nice.
In like 2011, 2012, and I'm not a tall person, and so the length for me was basically fine because I'm like a 37 short jacket anyway, and so
Nice.
just like a 38 regular in Black Fleece was just fine with me.
Lucky guy.
It's one of those funny things that like you said, it really, some of this stuff does depend on height, etc. But when you find that kind of thing that works within the realm of the style, it's so nice.
Yeah.
It was a good time to be short.
Yeah.
Basically, it was a good time to be short. It was like finally they had figured out how to make short people look good.
Right. Yeah. If I put on a 60s like regular length jacket, it's usually like 30 inches or so from the bottom of the collar, which is like
Right.
doesn't seem too long, but my proportions just don't work with it as much as I've tried over this.
Yeah, I'm 5'8", 5'9".
Okay.
So yeah, the back length from the collar, it should be about 29, 30 inches at the most. And
Right.
yeah, depending on the cut of the suit, that sometimes works for me, sometimes doesn't.
Totally.
But yeah, I remember when Mad Men came out, and that was a big influence on me and getting into that style. And then going to the forums, and there was a couple other guys on the forums at the time. This is the early 2000s, early 2010s, maybe 2008. I started posting, and there were some other guys that were really into that. And then there was these other guys that were into this crazy Italian bespoke clothing,
right,
or Savile Row suiting, and that was so foreign to me. I'm like, you mean you actually have new clothes made specifically for you? You don't go thrifting?
right. Back, and that was at a time when you could actually walk into a thrift store fairly regularly and come out with something rad.
Man, there's this one time. Okay, my wife and I complain about this all the time. So when I was growing up in Southern California, there were dollar thrift stores. I don't even think those exist anymore.
Yeah, I've got a couple
costs
personally.
$1. Nothing costs $1
nice.
anymore.
Yeah, I will not divulge where they are, but
oh, good. Yeah, keep that to yourself.
You have to go to some godforsaken place like in Alabama, okay?
Yeah, basically.
Oh man! So there was this dollar thrift store in Escondido, which is just north of San Francisco, and I would go in there every day after school. And this was when the latter part of my high school, I moved up to North County, and so these were all new thrift stores to me. So I would go into this dollar thrift store every day after school, and they had, at that time, I was actually into 40s clothing. So in my early teens, I was really into 40s and 30s clothing. And there was this thrift store, proper vintage clothing store in San Diego called Wear It Again, Sam.
Nice.
That I have. Do I even have any photographic evidence of those suits? I may. Like all.
Were you taking
40
suits?
No,
Even
not
then,
at that
you were
time.
taking the pictures?
No. That's the thing. That's why there's not a lot of photographic evidence. I wasn't as vain as I became.
Well, it's like it was hard. You can't take a fit pic, right? It's like the fit pic is kind of a disposable occasion.
Yeah, I don't even think I had a cell phone at that time. But if the cell phones, I don't think they had cameras back then, at least not easily usable ones.
Yeah, you were wasting your fit pic on film that cost money to buy and develop.
Yeah. And then, so that was in the early part of my teens. And then in the later part of my teens, I got more into 60s clothing. But anyway, this one thrift store, I got two suits. One was a pristine flannel, light blue flannel, very spaced out chalk stripe, but a faint chalk stripe. So not like a in your face kind of Bugsy Malone jockstrap.
Yeah,
It was
like
more of
a subtle one.
very subtle. And that was $1. And then I got a 60s suit also for $1. And I do have photographic evidences of both of those suits. They were really good, really cool suits.
Yeah, we're gonna have to see all of this photographic evidence because this sounds fucking great.
Yeah, the
I will.
dossier.
I'll take some pictures and I'll send them to you.
Hell yes.
Pictures of pictures.
Right, yeah.
Because they're film, right? They're like printed.
Yeah, they're printed out. I've got pictures. I was just looking at some of these pictures of me when I was living in. I have a photo album that I made when I was in New York of me like the year before. So 93, 94, and then the year I moved to New York, which was 95, and I have pictures of me during that time. And I was such a starry-eyed lad at that time. And but yeah, all of that is. I'll send you pictures. In fact, the one thing that remains throughout all of those pictures is that J. Crew tie, which is sadly I don't have anymore.
Oh man. Oh,
I know.
Wait, can you describe the J. Crew tie? Because honestly, they made some great neckwear in the like 80s and 90s.
Yeah, it was a rep tie. So it was a red and yellow, and if I'm not mistaken, very, very muted dark green J. Crew striped tie, and it was just the right amount of color. It was not relatively thin. It was about classic 3 inches.
Okay, yeah, solid.
Wasn't too thin, wasn't too fat. It tied really well. At that time, if you recall, in the 90s, ties were horrid.
Oh gosh,
Right.
yeah.
In a good way. So there is like a very 90s aesthetic that those kinds of ties look good with. So there was what was really popular at that time was two things. There very small knots were really big. So in the 90s, especially if you look at old Armani ads, the tie knot is super small and then it balloons out and creates this fantastic dimple. And Armani ties in particular were really about crepiness. So crepey silk or very textury silk.
Yeah.
Ties in general during that time were geometric, woven, not a lot of prints, or the prints were wild.
Yeah.
You had like Jerry Garcia ties.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I see those somewhat regularly. Oh
yeah.
God.
Yeah, I see them all the fucking time. I've never seen one that was worth wearing.
No, yeah, me neither. But those kinds of wild, it got kind of 50s-esque. So you did have a little bit of throwback to the 50s during that time.
Right. Almost like an atomic influence from that time period.
Yeah. I do still have some vintage 50s ties from that I still have but never wear.
Yeah.
Then what was also really popular was, and I've never seen it since. It hasn't come back. I don't know if it ever will. But it was a kind of weave. So they would print on silk, but the silk would have a damask on it. So if you looked at it in a certain light, it would have another pattern on top of the pattern.
Yeah.
Very hard to explain, but if you wore ties in the 90s, you most certainly had at least one of them was that.
If you have ever been a tie buyer in the industry, you know that these things still exist because companies, for whatever the fuck reason, keep trying to make this happen still. And it's like, guys, this is 2015. This looks like 1995. No, please no.
Yeah, well, men's style usually moves at a pretty glacial pace.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So when you were getting into style form and things, it seems like that's happening at the same time that Mad Men had sent its swan song or a siren call to you. So were you, kind of before you started and found the forums, like were you still wearing 60 stuff, or were you in kind of another mode at that point?
No, I was very much into 60s stuff. In fact, one of the reasons why I ended up on Style Forum was I was looking for a place to buy 60s suits now. Because at the time, I think all of the lapels were still around 3.5, 4 inches. And so it was very difficult to find one that was made. But, oh boy, I wonder if I remember the name of this maker. So there is a guy in Southern California and I met him in Alhambra, and I remember distinctly going down to Southern California and telling my wife, we have to stop in Alhambra so I can meet this guy. I think there's still a thread on
wait.
Style Forum.
Was this the like skinhead dude?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh fuck! I can't remember his brand either. But
Yeah.
like very much that like traditional skin vibe, which was basically
it's great.
Ivy. Yeah.
Yep. So he was a really cool dude that was living in LA. And if I go on Style Forum, and I think he's like one of the main contributors to the suede head into skinhead thread. Super knowledgeable guy, but yeah, his stuff definitely skews more mod suede head than Ivy. But he was the only one in California that I knew that could make that kind of a suit. So I went down there and I had a suit made from them, and it ended up sucking royally.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, that happens. That was my very first custom suit. So, and I'm glad I had a horrible experience because it only got better from there. But I did have some, and I have had since then some unfortunate bespoke experiences. But that was my first attempt to try and recreate something like that. That was new because I think the only thing, as we mentioned before, that was available at that time was black fleece, which was astronomically out of my budget.
Right. Yeah.
And oh man, I think anyway, I'll stop trying to think of it. But
It'll
at that
come
time,
to you at some
yeah, I
point,
was,
I'm sure.
yeah. At the time, I think my favorite character of that show, my wife's favorite character of the show is Pete.
Okay. That's an interesting.
Isn't
choice.
that what Zach said too?
Yeah, he did. Pete is one of those people that just ground on my nerves a good portion of the show. I think he has a redemption arc, but he's kind of a snivelly asshole.
He is. Yeah, he is such a tool. Man, yeah. I hated him.
Yeah, he's like not likable, and he's not supposed to be likable.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Vincent Kartheiser played that role very well, I will say.
Yeah,
he did.
He's like has no possessions type guy, like live in the woods type character. So he does an amazing job being Pete.
Right.
But at the same time, okay, it's been a while since I've seen Mad Men, and I wouldn't mind watching the series again. I haven't seen it since it came out, but similar to the main character, he came from kind of a nobody background.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he tries to make something of himself. He marries into a good family.
Right.
And he still has these self-doubts. Whereas John Hamm's character, he is very successful at it. And so he doesn't really have these self-doubts. They come up every now and then, but not really. He squashes them down and he continues with his pursuit of what he thinks is right.
Totally.
Isn't the point that he struggles with it? Like, isn't the point that he's like doing all the philandering, doing all the drinking, like because he can't hack it?
I think to Peter's point, he like dodders on that line. Most of the time, he doesn't think about it at all, and then it when it starts haunting him, it really is like kind of the secondary plot of every episode that happens. So I feel like he's really good at projecting his image, and I think maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I feel like one of the points of the show is him believing the projection 3/4 of the time, and 1/4 of that time not being able to handle it.
That's a great way to put it. I'd have to agree with you there. That's better said than what I was attempting to say.
I just came up with that shit off the top of my head, so I don't know.
That's how they pay you the big bucks.
Yeah, whereas Pete's way of dealing with his position and his aspirations is conniving and sniveling and pouting.
Right.
Which is not very
worse.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, my wife's favorite male character was Pete. I think everyone, including my wife's favorite female character, was what's her name? The secretary.
Oh, Peggy.
Peggy?
No, not
Peggy. Joan, Christina Hendricks' character.
Yes, Joan. Yes, Christina Hendricks. Because she would just wear amazing colors and amazing dresses that just perfectly fit every curve of her body. Whereas Betty, not Betty, or is it Betty?
Yeah, his wife.
Yes. Betty was kind of boring.
Right.
Um,
Very housewife. And like I don't know. It just the character itself was to me like very much like a Stepford Wives type vibe, which
yeah.
I think she was
Mhm.
supposed to be. Or maybe even she sought that out. I don't know.
Yeah.
She did.
So,
She totally did.
Right. Yeah.
yeah, she was looking for comfort in that, and then when she had such a philandering husband, everything just kind of came crashing down.
Right.
Or not that when she accepted it. I think she knew about it for a long time.
For sure.
But my personal favorite character is what's his name? I'm really sorry. I did not do my research, so you'll have to forgive me.
Oh, it's okay.
But the guy with white hair.
Oh, Roger
Sterling.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah.
Yes, Roger Sterling. Thank you. I liked him because everything was just so. It was a little more. It had a little more pizzazz than John Hamm's character.
Right.
Because John Hamm's character was extremely boring. Everything he did was to blend in. Whereas Roger's character had a little more style. He was a little more. He obviously came from a place that he knew his place in society.
Right.
And he was very comfortable
he had
with that.
grown up in this, in this whole thing too, which I feel like the way that he dressed was apt because he was one of the heads of this agency and had been there basically his whole life.
Yes.
Well, and he was an officer too, right?
Yeah, he was in the army. Yeah, with him as well.
But
then
not as a like grunt, and then like fake NCO. He was like a real blue blood officer.
Yeah.
So
and
he
then
had more of a.
There's a couple other characters that I really liked. Ken Cosgrove, I kind of liked his
style. Oh
yeah. Ken is a nice guy.
Yeah, for sure. He wore Ivy so well.
He did. Yeah, I think out of all of the guys, he was the one. And you'll have to excuse me for saying this, but he was the one that was the most California.
Oh, for sure.
He was like the more laid back guy. He was the likable guy. Not that everyone from California is likable, far from it. But he wore a lot of sport coats, which is definitely more California. He was the more like casual khakis or slacks and sport coat kind of a guy. Also, there was another guy that was like he seemed like he was the Greenwich Village guy. He wore funky stuff.
Oh, what is his
Rizzo?
Name? Rizzo is that's not who I think
Stan.
Stan.
Yeah, I thought that's the character.
Wait, I was thinking. Fuck. Now I'm blanking, but
because he was the guy walking around Greenwich Village all the time, like Kerouac and
but then you also had the character that like went on to be like a Buddhist for like a couple of what the fuck was his name?
Harvey or something.
This is gonna drive me crazy, but like his personal character style when it started being like later into the 60s and he was like in the beatnik vibe.
Yeah, he was all in.
Like
he was
it fucking awesome. It slayed so hard.
Yeah, he wore the I remember this one episode where, if I'm not mistaken, again, it's been a long time since I've seen the show, but he wore a jacket. So hear me out. It was like a sweater jacket. So it was a knit jacket.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It had like leather patch pockets near the hips, leather on the collar. It had a zipper with a circular pull. Like all of that was stuff that I'm like, I totally had that.
Yeah.
And I would see those in all these thrift stores. And to this day, my wife, whenever she sees something like that, she's like, why don't you get something like that? Which is true. They're just really cool. They're just amazing jackets. But yeah, Stan Rizzo was, once it got into the third and fourth season, the middle of the 60s, and he started to let his beard grow and he started to get chunky eyeglasses. And I'm like, oh, this guy's cool. I like this guy.
Paul Kinsey is who I was thinking.
Because he was a pipe smoker. There was only
he was a pipe smoker. Yeah,
that's right.
And that is a mark of distinction, I've got to say.
Yes, not everyone can pull out a pipe, least of all me. So yeah, I remember seeing him with that pipe. Yeah, he was great. I do like how later in the season, I want to say maybe because how many seasons did it last? Like 8 seasons?
12,
right?
yeah.
12. Wow. Okay.
10 or 12. I can't remember, but it's coming up on the 10th anniversary of the last season.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
that's part of it. Oh, sorry, 7 seasons. But
Okay. So
yeah.
7 seasons total. Right. Okay. So like later in the seasons, I want to say season 5 when the other company came in as part of the administration. And
Yeah.
Harry Hamlin's character came in, and I'm like, yeah, that guy. I remember him from what was the big '70s movie, Logan's Run.
Yes.
I'm like, I haven't seen that guy since Logan's Run, and of course, he's just impossibly handsome. And he comes in with these big, chunky glasses and a turtleneck, which was one of my favorite looks of the '60s. Is a nice suit and a turtleneck and big, chunky glasses. I think, well, that those kinds of things will never go out of style, and
Right.
still influence me to this day.
Same. I am a chunky glasses. My frames that I have right now are like 60s ones that I had made into glasses.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
going.
that's just my that whole thing. Like if it looks like Buddy Holly or somebody would have worn it, like that's my shit.
Let me see. What was my favorite episode? Probably the most memorable episode is the last one, and I hate to say that because that's
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
There is a podcast that I think it's on the Ringer that advertises on a couple that I listen to, and they like it's a podcast that they talk about like what actually happened, and part of it is like, did Don Draper really buy the world of coke? And every time I hear that, like it just started advertising the last month, which seems serendipitous, but it just makes me laugh. But yeah, the last episode's fantastic.
Yeah, that was and actually the whole last season, because you got to see Don Draper dress more casually.
Right. Yeah.
And you thought, okay, well maybe he's returning to his former self, or you can see a little bit of his former personality start to come through. And then at the end, you're like, he's still the same guy that he always has been.
Right.
But that's probably one of my favorite episodes. And the times when he is dressing more casually, it's a nice insight because you watch the show because you like, amazing costumes and suiting in the office. Why don't men dress like that anymore? But even in casual times when he's washing the car or when he's in his garage, you're like, man, that guy just can't lose. Even in a t-shirt and jeans, he's just washing the car. And
right. Yeah.
Still looks awesome.
I like that episode where Don just stays in California and finds like the hot rod dudes and starts.
That's later, right?
It's after he and Betty split. I don't remember exactly what episode it is, but his like friend that was married to the actual Don Draper.
Right.
When he stays with her and he's just wearing some like selvage jeans. I think he had engineer boots and a white t-shirt on, like coming back from the store, and like comes across these dudes. Like whoever. I don't know if John Hamm or Janie Bryant came up with that, but whoever did killed that fucking look for the time.
That was, man, that's such a great run. I remember all of those seasons were just so good, and everyone's arc was varied, and you didn't know where it was going to go.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a huge television person, but Mad Men at the time really struck a chord with me, and like it was the show that I made sure I could watch. And
what did you watch before and after? The reason why I asked that is because before Mad Men came out, my wife and I were really into Lost.
Okay. Never got into that.
Okay. Well, I don't recommend it because it's an incredible letdown.
Yeah.
It was a good idea.
Right.
It's a good idea. And there are parts of that show that shine and that really made the early 2000s. However, there's so much of that show that were just misses, and they kind of lost themselves.
Right.
And in total, it is not worth the time to invest.
I will say, and this will tell you everything you need to know. I admittedly have shit taste in movies and television.
Well, not in Mad Men, apparently.
Not in Mad Men. Mad Men is one of the shining beacons of my taste, but I love the Transformers Michael Bay movies. So,
okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Mad Men is
We gotta
an
mention the
anomaly.
fucking Michael Bay Transformers movies in everything we do. So here we are,
Contractually
yet again on our
obligated to
clothing
mention.
show.
Yeah, but I don't really have an answer. Like, I don't know what I watched before or after. Really, like, I don't think I've been into a
Matt
TV
won't
show.
even watch The Sopranos.
I want to watch
So,
The Sopranos. It's an undertaking that, like, I don't know. I will
So
get
is
to.
watching Transformers.
I will get to eventually.
I just started. Well, you and I are in the same boat because Sopranos was one of those that I think came out around
Boardwalk
the same
Empire
time.
would be something.
Haven't seen Empire. No.
Yeah, me either.
There's a bunch of shows that are on my to watch list.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I would say
after
the Boardwalk
Lost
Empire has like some significant similarities to
For
Mad
sure.
Men.
For sure. I don't think if Mad Men hadn't been done, Boardwalk Empire may not have been done either.
Oh wow. Huh.
Like, it feels like it's in that same legacy. Like The Sopranos,
Well, it's like
too.
a very thoughtfully done period
Like,
drama.
While I don't think what I know and what I've seen of The Sopranos is like the same subject matter or style influence or whatever of Mad Men, but like there probably wouldn't be the Mad Men without Sopranos.
No, and it's Michael Weiner did The Sopranos.
Oh, gotcha.
Or sorry, Matthew
Weiner, yeah,
did The Sopranos. Was I think a producer on The Sopranos.
Right.
Oh wow.
So they're like,
well, there you go. Yeah, he probably
so they are like
a lot.
sort of spiritually connected.
For sure. So Peter, since you were into the time period of tailoring that Mad Men mostly had throughout the run, was there anything that you picked up on that just wasn't right?
Well, I didn't live through that period, so I can't.
From your
really say.
aficionado phase, like, was there something you saw or things that you saw that you're just like, that doesn't seem correct?
Well, so I asked a bunch of people that did live through that era.
Oh, cool.
What they thought about Mad Men, and there's this. At the time, my wife and I were living in Berkeley, and there was an older couple that had lived through that time period, and they're like, "Yeah, that's mostly correct. However, obviously, because it is on TV, everything is very perfect. Plus, keep in mind, I'm asking people who are living in Berkeley, so things are a little sloppier, and maybe they just thought getting that dressed up was a little out of control. But they did say that pretty much everything was as it is. White shirts, people kept white shirts everywhere. And I will go so far as to say, in some circles, even into the 90s, if you were not wearing a white shirt, it was considered, who is this guy? Who is this scofflaw? Who is this
Right.
Bandito talking to me, and anything other than a white or blue Oxford shirt. So that was kind of true, and in fact, that kind of got me back into white shirts, because at the time on Style Forum, and even to this day, there are many people that say white shirts are too stark. They're too plain. They are much too formal. And in some ways, yes, they are. However, that's just classic Ivy.
Yeah.
That is the white Oxford cloth button down. You can't go wrong with that. And especially if it's rumply. So there are ways to make it less formal, which I think Ivy did very well.
For sure.
You didn't see too much of that in Mad Men because everything was very starched. But actually, now that you think about it, one of the characters that we were talking about in Mad Men, hang on, let me see who this is again, because he kind of did that really, really well. Ken Cosgrove.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So Ken Cosgrove, and of course Stan Rizzo, those are the more casual guys. They did that casual look very well. They were not overly starched. They rarely wore suits. And in the 60s, especially in California, that look was much more popular and much more common. People still iron their shirts, sure, but they would wear them casually a little more often. And white shirts was pretty much all that you had. Maybe blue, maybe pink, but California didn't do pink too much. They did blue.
Right.
I was more of an ivy style. I was talking to the guys in Buck Mason that did a whole thing on California ivy. So there is this guy. Oh, I can't think of his name. He is also on Style Forum. A wonderful dude. He lives in LA, and let me see if I can find him real quick. Oh man, it'll come to me. I'll send you a link of who this guy is. He's probably in his 60s, maybe 70s, and every time he posts something, it's wonderful because it is directly from that era. He does more classic ivy, so he doesn't do so much California ivy, but he does like yellow Brooks Brothers shirts, pink Brooks Brothers shirts, Madras, lots of loafers, lots of chunky shoes. It's really great. If you give me a second, you can like press pause, but give me a second, I'll see if I can find this guy, and you'll be like, oh, that guy. Of course, I know that guy.
Right.
Yeah. So you can go right ahead.
All right, so there's this guy in LA, Roy R. Platt.
Right.
Whose Instagram handle is Roy Crew. He dresses more in the classic ivy style, so not necessarily California ivy, but I believe he is a national treasure. I believe he is awesome. He dresses in pink shirts and madras and yellow sweater vests and saddle shoes, and
damn, yeah,
the guy is just amazing. However, California ivy is much more simple. It's much more pared down. Not a whole lot of color, which is not to say they weren't colorful. They would save their craziness for things like plaids and batik. California was really into batik clothing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's this one episode in Mad Men, I forget exactly which one it is, but they all go to Palm Springs. That is very California ivy. Everything about that episode, and whenever they do go to California, and specifically Palm Springs, it is a very California ivy look.
Right.
Still pretty plain, but none of the pinks, none of the yellows, none of those pastels that are commonly associated with ivy. It's still a lot of white shirts. It's still a lot of or blue Oxford shirts, but obviously none of the sweater vests.
Yeah.
But they do go a little crazy with the batik and with the palm trees and the atomic look and all of that.
Yeah. Those batik like period sport coats are so fucking cool, and you just
they're super hard to find.
I found in the past 7 or so years, I think I've found, and one of them, a good friend, it fit him perfectly. It was a 38 long, and he loves that stuff. And every time he wears it, I'm like, dude, you look so fun.
Every now and then, Beams Plus from Japan will make a batik jacket, and it's awesome. But they don't make too many of them. And of course, you always have to import from Japan, so you never really know what you're gonna get. But they do make them. They do pop up from time to time. I wish somebody would do something like that. But
when I worked in tailored menswear, like Southwick, Southwick for a number of those years had a couple of those, and they just kept repeating them because they never sold it well, because of course not. But I always wanted to make myself one of those jackets, and I was like, would I ever actually? Sadly, I appreciate it on somebody else, not myself.
Yeah, there was this weird, during that time of the 50s and 60s, the Ivy period in California, you still had a lot of Hollywood influence. So all of the Westerns that were made in the 50s and 60s, all of those sets were just out east. So a lot of those people that would go to the east, like Palm Springs, Riverside, they would incorporate some of their Western wear into the style of the time, which was Ivy, that sack cut, that Brooks Brothers cut.
Right.
So you had, because of Hollywood and because of everything that was being filmed in the LA area during that time, you had a lot of mixture of Western shirts, chambray shirts that were being worn with Ivy style suits.
Right.
So it is a really interesting time in California because of Hollywood, and California just casualizes everything as much as they possibly can anyway.
Totally.
So they would wear suits with, it was very common to wear suits with sneakers, worn with a bandana, worn with, it was very, very common to have that during that time. And if you look at old photos of in Palm Springs during that time, you'll see a lot of that. Bob Hope was a big fan. And there's a new book on, not to change the subject too much, but there's a new book on Western wear that posits that a lot of what we think about Western wear or what we associate with Western wear comes from Hollywood, for better or for worse.
Absolutely. It absolutely.
So because of that, it's, when we think of Hollywood style, we think of, when we think of Western style suiting, we think of the kind of suiting that Dwight Yoakam would wear, or even before then, Hank Williams would wear.
Yeah.
And even before that, any other Western musician, because all of that was associated with how Hollywood would interpret the Western style and make them a suit accordingly.
Right.
But cowboys didn't.
No, absolutely
like
not. Like Graham Parsons, Dwight Yoakam. Those guys. A lot of them did wear nudie, and nudie was basically like taking the Hollywood lens or taking like tailored clothing through a Hollywood lens. And it's so interesting to think about, because even going back to like Hank Williams in the 20s and 30s, he was, that style was ascendant.
Yeah, it's kind of sad to now 10 years after the last, did you say it was 10 years after the last episode of Mad Men? That time was so different from now, because at that time it totally dictated a clothing movement.
Right.
That lasted for a good long time. Now, granted, it came at the same time that slimmer fitting suits were starting to come into vogue, and it capitalized on that by basing its time period on the inspiration for that style. So it everyone enjoyed it, because it was wonderful to see the influence fleshed out in front of us, a whole universe with characters, and you could see these characters wearing them normally. So it wasn't staged, even though it was.
Right.
But it was as if we were looking into life as it once was, casual in the office, dressing up to go out to dinner, sitting by the pool. It was everything. And it was across America, right? It was from New York all the way to California and everywhere in between. So I do miss that. I think it was a very influential show on so many levels. Going over this now makes me want to go through the whole series again, because it was
it's
a great run.
It's convenient because they just started streaming it on Amazon.
Nice.
Of course, is not sponsoring this program.
No.
But it was an extremely influential show, and so thanks for giving us your time to talk about this. We hope that it was informative for all of for all of those who are listening, because I have learned some things. I think Obama mentioned Mad Men in a State of the Union in 2014. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's been around. It's been influential on many levels.
Yeah, I'm definitely have to give it another look, and I'll go through my photo albums, and I'll take pictures of those pictures.
I'm so excited to see this.
I'll send them to you. Yeah, some of them are pretty interesting.
Hell yeah. We will use them if you're cool with that on Instagram stories and things. But yeah, Peter, I also want to say thank you. What is your handles for people to find you?
If you want, you can look for me on Instagram. It's under my OG forum name, Urban Composition. And I do a podcast as well with Derek Guy. We talk about everything under the sun.
Hell yes.
And in fact, I'll be seeing him tomorrow.
Oh, nice. Tell him we said hello.
I definitely will. I definitely will.
We hit him up initially to do this, and he recommended you. So yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much for your.
Yeah, of course. It was great talking to you guys.
Yeah, everyone, thank you for listening. Come back next week for part 2 of our Mad Men special series, The Oral History of Mad Men as we see it. I am Matt Smith at Rebels Rogues.
And I'm Connor Nunez at Real Connor Nunez.
We are at Apocalypse Studs on Instagram, apocalypsestuds@gmail.com if you would like to send us whatever the hell you want to send. But yeah, thanks for listening and stay tuned for more Mad Men content.
Bye-bye.